My name's Sarah Lancaster. I'm the industry programmer for this year's festival. And thank you very much for joining us for our second in our Meet With series for this year. We'd like to thank the OMDC for their continued support of this series. And a big thanks as well to CAFTAD, who are our co-presenters for this panel and have also worked with the festival and with TIFF in presenting a fabulous exhibition, Otherworldly, the Art of Canadian Costume Design, which is fabulous and on right now through the festival and beyond, just next door in the TIFF Bell Lightbox. So thank you very much to CAFTAD for joining us in on this panel. I'd like to introduce you to the moderator for this panel, who will introduce our wonderful panellists. I'd like to welcome Sydney Levine. She was the founder of Film Finders, which was later sold to IMDb. She is an extensive writer, and you may know her blog on IndieWire, Sydney's Buzz. So we're really thrilled to have her here for this session, and I'll throw to you, Sydney. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So hello, I'm so glad to see you all here. I'm moderating this panel. I can't speak about myself much. She said what I needed to have said. I blog for IndieWire on the international film business, and I moderate panels. I'm very, very strong on education, but my area is usually education in the international film business. So I got to learn so much with this panel, and I hope you enjoy it. We'd like to know who you are because we want to speak to you. So we don't know, are you costume designers yourself or aspiring costume designers? Anybody? Are you filmmakers? And did I see an aspiring costume designer kind of maybe?
I'm more in production design, but I'm very interested in costume design.
And who else is in production design? Most of you are filmmakers. Okay. So you're making your own films. Good job to you. I don't know how you do it. It's the hardest thing in the world to make a film. And when I started listening to our costume designers talk about their part of it, as if it's a small part, there's no way I could even do that. I mean, to conceive of making a movie is incredibly complex, incredibly. My hat's off to you. And to them, it's so complex. We have three very, very different costume designers here. We have Alex Kavanaugh here, and Alex has designed many horror films, 3 George Romero films, Saw 2, Saw the Final Chapter, Ginger Snaps. Ginger Snaps is really interesting because it's also historical, and she did Repo, the musical. So she has a broad spectrum, but I watched the horror films and learned the most from her films. And would you like to elaborate a little bit before I introduce the others on your take on your business?
Yes, I should just say I did Ginger Snaps 2 and 3. I didn't do the original. That was Leah Carlson, who's awesome. And I do a lot of horror movies, but that's not all I do. I consider myself a character designer. I like to do pieces with lots of interesting characters. And we just happen to have a lot of fun doing horror films. And I work here in Toronto, and we make a lot of horror films here.
The character, I like what you said about character. When I spoke to Delphine, white. Sorry. We're all nervous. When I spoke to Delphine, she talked about characters. We'll have certain talking points here that I will define after I introduce them, each one of them. But Delphine is the most experienced. She's done television, theatrical, and movies. She started with Cronenberg and Scanners and Videodrome, and she has 2 films coming out now. On September 30th is Jim Sheridan, who did My Left Foot, his movie called Dream House. So she's done a wide array of films, and she talked to me about character, just to repeat what Alex said. Would you like to talk a little bit more about yourself?
I don't know what to say. I've been around a while, and since the 70s I've been designing costumes, and I've pretty much probably done just about everything. At this point, I really enjoy all aspects of it. There isn't one that I enjoy, one aspect of it that I enjoy, or one genre I enjoy more than any other. So essentially, that's it, I suppose.
And finally, we have our newcomer, which is Heather Neal. And Heather basically started in '99, and we can hardly talk about her work because she has 2 films that are going to show here. One is Guy Madden's Keyhole, and the other one is Goons. And when we spoke a bit, she talked about how, I mean, I want you to talk more about it, but I want to have the pleasure. Keyhole had 30 short stories in it. She had to design for every one of them, plus the movie. And she had a budget of $8,000. I don't know how it's possible. All the budgets are always under discussion. They're always too little. And one thing Delphine said was, no one ever looks at a movie and says, oh, that poor costume designer didn't have enough money to design the clothes. So she always has to fight for the budget. And Delphine, Heather's other film here is Goon, which is really like 2 stories because it's a hockey movie and it's also the contemporary story. So would you like to say a little more?
Sure. Well, I'm based in Manitoba, so both of the films were filmed last year in Winnipeg, and were really completely different from one another. So it was just a mix of crazy Madden chaos, which was an understatement sometimes, and then going to more of a, I guess one of the hardest films I worked on, Goon. We just had so many teams and uniforms and all kinds of personalities, but it was fun. I learned a lot.
Another thing she said, well, I'll give you the topics of this. The costume designer is way beyond design. And one of the things that comes up is people say, what, it's a contemporary, there are uniforms, what's the design? They are costumes. And you can speak to that, I mean, if you would, just a little bit on why, how can you say a uniform is a costume?
Well, in the film, there was a lot of different hockey leagues that we were trying to costume, and within the leagues, there's different teams, and then you've got your home teams, your away teams, you've got your stunt doubles, and it's just multiples after multiples, and we had a really hard time because we were trying to make the movie at the height of hockey season for getting uniforms ready, so it was really, really difficult to actually find. I couldn't find anyone in North America who could do everything for me at once, or for the price, or in the time. So I had to actually go to China for all of our embroidery and numbers, and made some great contacts there. But that was the only way and the only affordable way I could get it done. So it was tricky.
Incredible. And you think you're a Canadian filmmaker, and she has to go to China to get the things for your film? Yeah, definitely.
I have a point about uniforms too, that it's interesting because uniforms, you think, oh, everybody's going to look the same. You know, with police uniforms, they have to wear their tie bar exactly here and all that. But if you really look at, say, for instance, police uniforms in the street, you'll notice some of them wear a turtleneck with a sweater, some of them wear a tie, some of them don't wear a tie, some of them wear a dress shirt. And that is all part of bringing character into the movie and into the individuals that play the part. So even with uniforms, you can bring different aspects of personality in.
Mm-hmm. I'd also like to mention with uniforms, and as filmmakers, most of you understand that there are other issues beyond just design of you want them to look a certain way, but there's clearances, right? So with hockey teams, a lot of things have been copyrighted or trademarked, and you cannot use them. And when we're doing stuff, especially with police forces in movies like Saw, they don't want their logos on any of those people. So we're often creating new things, and they have to go through a whole clearance vetting process so that, you know, nobody gets offended. And so with regards to, there's the design aspect of we want a blue uniform, but then there's also the practical aspect of actually getting it on camera legally, you know, so there's so much more than just the actual, oh, it looks right, but also can you get sued for it?
Yeah, amazing. the amount of things going into the job of a costume designer. Costume designer has to design all the costumes, obviously. And we will differentiate what's a costume and what's a style, what's fashion. They also have to have a budget. And roughly, I understand, maybe about 10% of the overall budget sort of goes to costumes. They also have to have presentation skills because they have to convince the producer and the director to hire them, or the producer to give them more money, or the director to get their vision, and maybe the director has an entire other vision, or maybe he has no vision or she has no vision about style at all. So there's the presentation and the education and working under lots and lots of pressure. Heather had said when they ordered the costumes, they were coming the whole time from China throughout the whole movie. So you have to be able to work on a dime under a lot of pressure. So you have to have stamina, 16-hour days, and you have to be adaptable, and you have to make actors feel at ease. Maybe you're taking them out of what they're used to, and they have their own ideas. They're in clothes they don't know how to move in. So that's the subjects that I want us to cover. And we can begin with that, but we also have all those beautiful pictures, and we thought we would talk about one per person. So I'm kind of at a loss right now. Shall we talk about design versus fashion, and would you like to do that? And if you want to pull up your picture, we could do it or not. But let's talk about just the idea of costume versus design and fashion, okay? And let's talk about how do you begin when you get the job, or how do you even interview? Talk about a little how you interview to get the job.
Well, it depends on the interview, but usually I'll ask for a script. More and more lately, people aren't releasing scripts ahead.
Oh.
So you get a treatment, and you can sort of tell what it's about. But normally, I would ask for the script ahead and read the script, and probably a couple of times before I interview. And then what I'll do is I'll just take cues from the script about lighting, location, season, all of the things that affect the design of the picture. And essentially, I put a book together when I come to the interview, because I'm not really that great at talking off the cuff. So it provides a forum for us to discuss, and it will be full of ideas. And those ideas will come from art, photographs, people in the street. I'll go out in the street and photograph people, magazines, like just anywhere I can get an idea, something I've seen. And then I'll put the book together, and we'll talk through the characters. And very often, just to get the mood going, I'll find something that sort of shows the light of that scene and how it's going to affect the color and the colors that I think. But the whole time, it's a very fine line, because the whole time you really want the director to come across with their idea, but you also want to show that you can perform for them. So, and generally I find it's better just to talk about their project rather than, like, I do bring a portfolio, but rather than show the portfolio, because really it's their project they're interested in. So essentially that's how I prepare for an interview.
I'm kind of the opposite. This is why you always get the job. And I don't. No. Early on, I would do the whole bringing photos and reference and stuff like that. And I got burned in like 2 interviews in a row where they're like, well, I don't like this belt. It's like, well, it's kind of, I pulled that image for the attitude of the character, and I really love that jacket. They're like, yeah, but she would never wear that belt. I'm like, well, it was just for a picture from a magazine. It wasn't, I didn't. So I was just saying, well, yeah, but imagine it's like you put your finger over the belt. It's like, yeah. And so it was one of those things that it was just, and another time, that I was specifically asked, you have to bring this whole presentation, and, read the script, and you get in the door, and they're like, oh, yeah, well, we're totally changing the setting of the script. And then they're expecting, without telling you in advance, and they're expecting so I've pulled all these images based on the script. And so now I just usually just go in with my portfolio, and I'll talk about the script. And you know, because a lot of it is as asking questions, trying to glean from the director or the producers, whoever's in the interview, what they want to see out of it. So it's one of those things that with my portfolio, I'm showing them what I have done, what I can bring to the table. A lot of times it's, you know, just as a talking point. And I think that's part of the process of an interview, is for one, seeing if you can click with the right, you know, with them, like if there's a good communication stream, and then just having, you know, jumping off points to talk from. So, you know, for the most part, I do a lot of dark movies. So, you know, I was really surprised when I got, you know, hired to do a romantic movie. But, you know, it comes down to character, and that's the thing. My movies may be dark, but it's all about building characters. So that's, for me, the interview process really starts with the script, and it's really frustrating when you get asked to come in for an interview without a script, and that's when all you can do is bring in your portfolio and say, well, this is what I do, and don't know anything about your show other than it's top secret. So then we just go from there. But, you know, sometimes even just asking, you know, are you shooting HD or are you shooting 35 mil? So, you know, because it affects our choices on texture and color, and, you know, when you know the various sort of technical aspects of what they're going to, how they're going to shoot something, and you can sort of say, well, then I suggest this or that or the other thing.
Very interesting. And how did you go about getting your jobs?
Well, it was funny, with Goon especially, I got a call the day of the interview, and I asked them, well, I had all kinds of plans. I had no idea I was going to go for the interview. I didn't even know it was an option that I could go for the interview. And they called me up and they said, well, can you come down in, you know, half an hour? It was really down to like that much time, and I didn't have time to read the script in advance. Wow. And so when I got there, I was extremely nervous because I didn't have time to fully prepare, you know, in a way that Delphine or Alex were talking about. I just didn't. I just had to go in. It helped that I had just finished working on Keyhole, so I had met one of the producers there that was just visiting set. But other than that, I just had to talk about, especially for the film, I think it helped. I worked on Don Cherry, which filmed the year before, so I was familiar with all of the hockey aspect of that, and I think that's was really key for helping me get the job, because I knew all about the costuming and what was involved and how to get the uniforms and how to put them on. So that helped a lot, but it's a process which I'm learning, you know, with each interview, I think.
And with Guy Madden, how did that come about?
Well, with Guy, I've known him for probably over 20 years, and my husband has been in his early film, like he's been in actually quite a few of his films, so he's really close to our family, and he's asked me to work on a lot of other projects in the past, but I was always working on something else, so it was finally, the timing was right. So that's basically how that happened.
So when you get the job, there's this thing about dressing the characters. What about that? I mean, you get the job, how do you get it into your head? What's next? I mean, I would just be panicked. I would be paralyzed. You're not. So, Delphine, when you read the script, talk about how you dress the character to make the character. You would talk to me about that a bit. Alex? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because character versus actor, you know, there's the script, and then when, you know, so, I mean, how many times have we gone in as, you know, they've written the script for, you know, rugged guy with eye patch, and then, you know, they cast a male model, and then so you're trying to make this guy who's so squeaky clean look, you know, into this rugged sort of seafaring pirate or whatever. So oftentimes the actors, their first interaction with the production, other than their audition, is actually when we call them and talk to them, find out their sizes and get a sense of what they look like. Before we even do that, though, we spend time with the script, and we do this, you know, pull images, whether it's doing sketching, if it's contemporary, looking through magazines or other reference material. Sometimes it's like watching music videos, or sometimes we even reference other films. It depends on what the movie is about. And then you just sort of, I think all costume designers, when you read a script, you get a mental picture. I don't think we would be doing what we do if we didn't have that ability. And so that's kind of what we bring to the table. It's like, well, I just picture him this way. He's like totally the James Dean, white t-shirt, blue jeans kind of guy. Even though cinematically that's not like, oh, exciting costume, but it's what it is it's simple. And then you have to sell that to the director before you try and sell an actor or anything. You got to make sure you go through the proper channels, and you have a meeting with the director, go through the script and talk about each character and see if they have a backstory and see if there's, I like to talk to the production designer too to see if they have an idea of what they want to do. I was like, well, the house, all the walls are going to be painted red. And it's like, okay, well then that affects how you're going to dress people in that house. For one, you're not going to put people in red, but or maybe you are, and there'll be disembodied heads walking around. So it's all sort of whether or not there's a concept in place, and then sort of trying to make these lifelike people come, as opposed to just the dialogue. You're trying to round out their character visually by giving them clothing that would, really make you believe that person is what they say they are.
Do the actors ever get like, I can't wear that, or I want to wear this?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, I've worked on films where actors have actually, we've been months in prep, and we've gone over the script, and I've sat in meetings with the production designer, the cameraman, the DOP, and the production designer, and we've just, we've kind of locked everything in. We've locked a look, and on one of the shows I worked on, the lead actress was cast 2 days before we went to camera. And she played the second day. And she had, many, many, many changes. And she just came in and she said, this is the way I'm playing the part, and this is, and didn't even kind of want to listen to all of this prep work. So a lot of what we do is turning on a dime and kind of readjusting and meeting again with all the people that we've met with. And because essentially it is about the actor's comfort. It's about carrying the director's vision and the actor's comfort and coming together with that look, negotiating that to maintain the look. And I think that's the sign of being successful, is being able to maintain the look and come up with a good feeling for the characters and work with the people very quickly, being adaptive.
How is it working, like, with Isabel Rossellini and giving her clothes?
It was frightening. No, that was the film where I didn't have a huge budget at all.
$8,000.
Yeah, and we were shooting the feature film, which had a huge cast on its own. And then at the same time, we were doing The Hauntings, which were guys' short films. So we were doing, originally I think they wanted to do 70, and it kept whittling down, but it was really came down to time and money. So I had some money where I could rent period costumes from Ian Drummond. I rented for Isabella and Jason. Pretty much everyone else in the movie or the short films just had, close facsimiles of what may look period. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was interesting because when you have the money, you have more options available to you. And I didn't have that many, but they were all very understanding and really, they were kind of excited about it, even though they knew the limitations of it. Yeah. So it was good.
Did you make the clothes, or did you shop and buy the clothes?
For Keyhole, we had to. We didn't have a lot of time, so we made some things because we needed multiples, and a lot of it though was purchased from secondhand stores or borrowed from people in theaters or wherever I could get it for really cheap. That's important.
When you say you didn't have a lot of time, how much time did you have? Was it weeks, days, months?
I think it was 2 weeks for the feature.
2 weeks. Wow.
Yeah,
Boy.
and a week for the hauntings.
And, well, we talked about going to China to get your stuff, and I noticed one other story that doesn't pertain to these designers, but it was so strange to me. And you can see the uniform or the clothes he's wearing. Woody Harrelson is a vegetarian, so he would wear nothing out of animal, anything. No leather, nothing. So the costume designer, and it's in there in the exhibit, had to design something all vegetarian clothes. I mean, all plants or whatever. To talk a little about, maybe we should talk about your picture up there that you would like to show, which is number 30, I think it was, about, let me see, was it 30? Oh, I know what I wanted to talk about. Excuse me for being scattered. I wanted to talk about shopping versus making your clothes. I cannot imagine how you can make all your clothes, how many people must take to make it. I know you've had experience, and I know you've had experience going to H&M shopping. This is what reminded me. How many of you have ever seen Splice? Whoa, what a movie, what a movie. And those clothes, how did you find those clothes?
Well, for the most part, you know, Splice is a contemporary film, and it's most of the characters are, you know, supposed to be just normally dressed and with personality. So we go out, same thing, we do boards or we tear pictures out of magazines and we find images that we like and, you know, talk about the character. And then we have to go find clothes that are similar to that and then do a fitting and realize, oh, that doesn't look good on you. Let's try something else. And that's the normal process. But when you have a character like Dren, who is, you know, a hybrid creature, all the concept work that was done for her was always done in the nude. And so, you know, Vincenzo had been working, the director, Vincenzo Natali, had been working on the film for 10 years. And so he had a sort of image of Dren as being very childlike. And, you know, there was a whole sort of metaphor of, you know, child rearing in the film of, you know, them raising this creature like a child. And so he kept in his mind picturing cute little girly clothes on her, you know, he's like, well, maybe with little flowers or little, you know, pink dresses and ruffles. And so, you know, in adult sizes, we're not a lot of that out there. So, you know, when I said, well, okay, well, we started doing some rough sketches and I got some fabric swatches and I was going to make the stuff and say, this is what you want, we'll make it. But unfortunately, what happens with a lot of people is they can't tell, you know, they look at a sketch and they can't imagine it as a real thing. If you show them a picture and from a magazine, like here, this is somebody wearing this dress, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I like that one, let's try it. But you see a sketch and it's kind of like they're having a hard time taking the jump, even though, you know, actually Vincenzo himself is an amazing artist. He does a lot of storyboarding and drawing himself. It's that sort of being able to imagine this floral print into it. Anyways, so I had some stuff made up for the fitting, the first fitting, and it was a disaster because, you know, it just didn't work. Once we realized, because she had she had her head shaved, and the creature itself was so otherworldly that what we found was best is just to keep it very simple. And so we were running out of time and money. And so, you know, Delphine had her own little gray dress on with her from the fitting to the fitting, and we threw that on. We're like, this kind of works. So I just went out shopping into a bunch of different stores, but H&M just happened to be like the store that year. Oh, Delphine Cheniac, sorry, not this Delphine. The actress is, no, Delphine wasn't in the fitting. Sorry, of course, I don't think of the two as being the same name, but they are. So the actress from France, her name was Delphine. And so we just ended up going very simple. We had little roughly details and whatnot, but just sort of store-bought clothes that, you know, that we could afford. And it worked great because it wasn't about the clothes, it was about the character. And so trying to sort of highlight the character and you know, packaging it in the little outfits, but making sure that they weren't taking away from the actual character itself.
On character building, this Delphine has often talked about how when she reads, it's always about the character. It's not about the actor, it's about the character. In Tidelands, which is a period piece.
It's not actually.
It's not a period piece?
It's not
her
a period
mic
piece.
isn't working. Ah.
It's, did I turn it off? Maybe it's on. Okay.
It's on?
Is it
Okay.
on? It's now, but these people are very impoverished, and they're the people in the story. It was written. It's after a novel called Mitch Cullen.
This is
Mitch Cullen wrote.
Picture 13, by the way.
And directed by Terry Gilliam, and it was a co-design. I worked with another costume designer called Mario Davignon. We've known one another since the 70s in Montreal, and it actually is meant to be contemporary. And one of the things that was in it is in the story because it takes place where it actually takes place. I think it's in Texas. But we were shooting in Saskatchewan in August, September, and October, and into early November. And the little boy in it, Dickens, runs around in a bathing suit. And when I read the script, I remember saying to Mario, I think he should be in a wetsuit. He's not going to be able to run around in the cold in October and act at the same time. And so we sort of went over that. And then we went to Terry and said, I think the guy should be in let's consider a wetsuit. So we were in Regina, and we went around to all the dive shops because we needed at least 5 of these that looked the same so he could wear it throughout the picture. And the poor cutter, when we told him we wanted this wetsuit cut to fit the actor, and he had to glue it. Thank goodness, Robert Fenwick, he was fantastic. He just, he cut this thing up and glued it for us, and then we broke it down, and so, character can sometimes be dictated by the conditions you're filming in as well, and always, always, always taking the comfort of the actor into play.
So you changed it from
A bathing suit. Yeah, he was running around just in a little pair of swim trunks. That was or meant to, anyway, in the novel, that's the way it was.
And talking about character, she also did Bulletproof Monk, which is my favorite costumes of all time. And she did a beautiful coat on Bulletproof Monk. We have Bulletproof Monk up here, actually. It's picture number 15, picture 15. Could you just talk, because I found it so interesting, about the coat, which you won't see up here, that they designed, and people were calling and saying, where can I get that coat? But you had made it for...
Can we just grab you on that mic?
Sorry.
Can we grab you?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Bulletproof Monk, she designed for character, right?
Yeah.
Could you talk about that? But in the designing for the character, the one where you made that beautiful coat, which is in the exhibit, that beautiful coat that people called and wanted to know where they can get that. Can you talk a bit about
Bulletproof
that?
Monk was based on a comic of the same name, Bulletproof Monk. So when I met with Paul, one of the design concepts, he wanted a 40s, what he said to me was, I want a 40s vibe. So it starts off, the very beginning of the movie is in, I think, at least where the genesis of the whole thing happens is in Tibet, where Chow Yun-fat, who's the lead player, is a monk, a traditional monk. And so by the end of the picture, Jamie King now, becomes one of the monks. So throughout the picture, we kept this kind of palette of the monks' robes, the beautiful reds and saffrons, and that came into play when she finally becomes the monk that carries the secret throughout eternity, or however long she survives, we don't know. So when it came time, when they finally decided on the ending, as with many scripts, we started filming and they hadn't decided on the end of the film yet. So so this design actually took place probably within the last 2 to 3 weeks of filming. And I really sort of based it on a traditional monk and used many different types of silks and pulled them together. And her costumes had always had a kind of an Asian influence. So I kept that kimono and fit it in a way that would be a little more complementary to her figure to signify the outer robes, and then put her in a little vest that sort of reflected the saffron colors and some red leather pants that were kind of maybe meant to be quite, you know, trendy at the time. They were low cut, and that way she moved forward into the future as a monk, a monk of the future. So that was it, and I had people writing to my agent and asking, well, where can we get one of these coats? We'd really love to have one of these coats. So I think maybe they thought it was bought. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So you created a fashion that other people wanted. I think that's really important in the design, that it's an art, and she's creating this art. When I looked at Alex, I thought, oh, she does horror. She has to do 30 similar shirts with all the same blood stains, and that was incredible to me, that aspect. But then when she did the backstory of Ginger Snaps, and she had to go into costumes of the past, that was even more fascinating to me. And you couldn't do exactly, she said one thing, I loved it. It was 1801 they made the film, the time period. And so on the cape, which I hope you'll talk about, and maybe I'll pull it up here, I hope. I don't know what picture yet. I have to see what picture. 3. Picture 3. Anyway, the period piece, she said, this cape was so beautiful, and the stitchers made it, and we couldn't use grommets. You know what a grommet is? One person, 2 people, I didn't know. It's the steel like on your shoes, the shoelaces come through a hole and there's steel around them, or a cape. They weren't invented yet, so she had to figure out a different way of how they made them. Talk a bit about that and the period piece and style and fashion and creation of the art.
Well, Ginger Snaps 2 and 3 we shot back to back. 2 is a contemporary film. 3 was set in the past, and there wasn't yet a script when I interviewed. But it was about a fur trading fort. And when I went to school, I went to Dalhousie, the costume studies program in Halifax, and we actually studied the early 1800s was our sort of thesis project for our final year. And so I had all my research. So I came and I pitched, I said, I think we should do 1815, which in, you know, the colonies would have been a little bit sort of earlier styles. And I just brought in a whole bunch of images of paintings and, you know, etchings and all the various research of the day. And they went for it. So I'm like, all right. Now, the one thing is that period is called, you know, has many different names, Empire, Directoire, you know, Georgian, or is it Georgian? Yeah. And so I call it Directoire, but most people know it as Empire waistline. Well, they also had they used to pad out even around the back and everything. It's a really hard period to sell, the whole Jane Austen period, to the modern eye, because everyone thinks it makes everybody look pregnant. So, you know, we had to change the way we cut all the dresses so that they wouldn't have the fullness in the front. We kept them flat. And same thing with all the various pieces. Where we did all the research, we had all the exact stuff, and then we modernized it so that, you know, to a modern eye, it felt period, but it also was attractive. And that's the thing with the corsets, you know, it happened to be a period where corsets were, you know, before and after corsets were worn, but it was kind of like a bit of a time when people were, you know, the Napoleonic era, where, you know, they were a whole revival of Grecian the Grecian statues as Napoleon sort of conquered that part of the world. All that sort of really naturalistic body line was all the rage. So they didn't really wear tight-waisted corsets, but we had a whole scene where they did. Some of them wore them. The younger girls wouldn't have worn them. So I created the corsets based on, you know, what probably an older lady would have worn as opposed to the young girls, just because it looks more corsety and, well, it looked cool. So that was the thing. A lot of the things, you know, with the hunter, his leather jacket, I based it on a real pattern of a red river coat, but I made it in a different leather that was more cool and more superhero-y. So it was one of those things where I took a lot of creative license, but, you know, the research was done. So I think when you watch the film, you really feel you get into it, like all the fur traders and everything like that. We had a lot of fun with the voyageurs and the layers, and I had all their sashes woven, you name it. But again, always sort of, creating it for a modern audience of people who want to see something that's cool.
I think that's so interesting. We see things with our modern eye. We think it's period. They change it to fit our eye. It's so complicated, so complicated. And then the 30 shirts with blood. This concept of how many pieces you have to have of one costume because so many things happen. Can you talk a little about that?
Well, I think we've all experienced that on various shows, especially on movies where there's, blood, dirt, or water, right? Those are the things that progress. And so you can get dirty and progression of dirt, bloody, progression of blood, and then, wet, dry. So we have to have, even though on film it looks like they're wearing the same shirt and it just keeps getting dirtier, because most films are shot out of sequence, we have to preset that dirt and make... Ever watch a movie and you're like, why is there suddenly a big smudge of dirt on it? Well, that's when they've cut out a scene. And you missed a scene that has the dirt part. It happened in Saw 3. There was a whole fight sequence where, something happens and she gets a cut in her shirt. And then they decided to cut that part out. So she goes from having just a regular T-shirt to a T-shirt with a cut in it, never explained. It's because, with editing. But when we're shooting these things out of sequence, we have to sort of, from the script, figure out how they're going to look. And Harold and Kumar go to White Castle. There was this whole thing where, John Cho's character, Harold, was wearing a light colored jacket, and somebody grabs him, and he's supposed to be a mechanic, and he's got greasy fingers. So he grabs him, so we established the after scene before we shot that scene. So, we had to put and then when we go to shoot it, and then you have to remind the director, okay, remember, we got the dirt on that side, so he has to grab him from that side. Well, that doesn't work. We want to shoot it from the other side. It's like, well, hell, we can't do that. So, I think, when we break down the script, we have to think ahead, not just, what are they going to wear, but what's going to happen to it over the course of the film, because we might be shooting the last scene of the film before we shoot the first scene. That's part of our challenge. And, to do that, we have what we call multiples. I was just comparing notes with Delphine, because I do lower budget shows. So we don't have, money for 50 of anything. But, on Bulletproof Monk, you guys had quite a few of the monk costume.
Yeah, I was just thinking, for those of you who are going to be producers, I've had a lot of production managers call me up and say, well, this is easy. This is going to be an easy film for costume because there's only one script day. But it actually depends on the action and what happens, how that person progresses over the one script day. And even if they are wearing only one costume, a lot can happen. And in Bulletproof Monk, for instance, just by happenstance, the lead male had one costume, which was a broken down leather jacket, but we needed 35 of these. And the same with his pants and shirt. And as a matter of fact, the same thing that Alex was just talking about, we had to break it down because we shot out of sequence. But it looked like a real typical motorcycle jacket, and you would think you could go buy it anywhere. But in the end, we had to end up having them manufactured and breaking them down. So it isn't always easy just because there's one script day.
And you were saying even the amount of material, you don't just go to a yardage shop and they have all that material. So you have to go like to the house that manufactures it.
Well, as with Heather, we ended up in Asia for a lot of fabrics because we just couldn't get the quantity we needed to.
Exactly. Or you'll find sometimes you'll work on a project where they tell you you're going to need a lot of multiples, and they're going to go through a lot of different, fights or mud or whatever it is. And then you realize on the day they actually only used one, and you're left with 5 just waiting. Wow. But you don't want to take the chance of not having them when you need them.
Let's talk about your picture number 30, which is this beautiful, the scene. If I don't find it, they'll see it.
Right. Well, this was just an example of Keyhole. We had a huge cast, and like as I was saying before, we were shooting simultaneous short films at the same time, but we had so many of these great actors that were really almost responsible in a sense for their own costumes in a way. It was like an assembly line in the morning. We just had so many people coming through in so little time, but it was also very hot. We were filming in July in Winnipeg, and it was very, very hot, and they were all wearing winter clothing, hats, scarves, no air conditioning, so it was, this is just my homage to how great these actors were for dealing with the hot weather, but it was fun. It was an interesting experience, that's for sure.
Before we open it to you all, we talked about period, but talk about that, the contemporary clothes that everyone thinks, I know contemporary, we all know contemporary. That itself is a problem. Talk about that problem when it's a contemporary story.
Well, fashion is in the eye of the beholder, right? Oh, I like skinny jeans. Oh, I only wear wide leg jeans. So everybody wears clothes, so everyone suddenly has an opinion when it comes to contemporary clothing as costume. And I think this is a struggle that we often have in our department where, especially right now, especially with network television, there's an approval process that, you have to show this whole thing. They want to see tears, they want to see boards, they want to see images, and then, before you even know who's cast. So you say, well, oh yeah, and then they'll say, well, yeah, this is the cost. This is what we want this person to wear. This is really hip, or this is, whatever. And then they cast someone who can't, it's like, oh, she's either, they cast someone curvy or they cast someone who's skinny or whatever, and it just doesn't work. And it's this constant thing of, going out to buy clothing or, contacting designers or designing it yourself to be what is contemporary fashion, because it depends on where you are in the world, what the character, how much money the character has. I remember working on a show where the character is supposed to, be like actually part of a film crew. And the actor, though, wanted to wear all, Armani. And it was kind of like, well, really, you should be in Levi's. So it was just kind of one of those things that, it's all subjective. And it's frustrating because there's definitely way more chefs in the kitchen once you start dealing with contemporary fashion. And I was on a pilot that had, people weighing in. Well, my wife doesn't like skinny jeans. Like, really? What does that got to do with? What does that have to do with anything? It's a or they want avant-garde fashion, but then they're like, well, that's a bit too. Right today, in a land of Lady Gaga and all these people who are really pushing the fashion envelope, what is avant-garde? So it's all very subjective. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult because, that's part of our job is to know where fashion is going. A lot of times the movies that we design, that we're creating characters for, and we're considering palette and groupings of actors, you don't want, if everyone had their way, they'd all be wearing black and, it'd be it's like you have to give some interest to the camera. You have to give, distinction between the characters, and you're trying to give visual cues for those characters. But in the end, you have to do it on a budget, and you have to make sure that it all sort of makes sense to the audience. Sorry, I kind of lost my point. I had a point.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that it's really important to understand, too, the sensibility of the producers that you're working for, mm-hmm. because producers from Los Angeles will have a completely different aesthetic and sensibility than a producer from New York or a producer from Britain. And I think you really have to take that into account when you're designing a show. It's also what sells. Like, you're really... if it's a commercial film, they want the clothing has to help sell the film as well. So
that's what I forgot. The films that we're shooting oftentimes aren't released for a year or two. Yeah. So you're trying to project what's going to be in style next year. So you're trying to avoid what's very in right now, and so people are like, "Wow, I like this." It's like, yes, but that's kind of last year. By the time this movie comes out, so we're have to be a bit looking into our crystal ball and know what's going to happen, what's not.
Well, I also think that's why it's important to work. Like, I do a lot of shopping in resale stores and that kind of thing, because sometimes when you go to stores that are current now, you'll walk into a store and all the clothes will be purple or gold, and you cannot get what you're looking for. And also, when you're trying to project like that, that's why it's really important to work with character. I think of something like I said to Sydney yesterday, the Annie Hall character. That was all pulled from clothing that was current at the time, maybe not fashionable, but current, and it certainly was a style that lasted for years and years and years afterwards. So that's it.
Would you all like to ask some questions? Oh, goody. Yes. Oh, wait, let's hear it. Yeah, thanks.
I'm Siggy. Nice to meet you, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm a script supervisor, I have been, and it's all part of this whole thing because, you know, like as you were mentioning, blood and everything. And I had to keep track of each frame and how it worked because, you know, this is a very important part, and a lot of people miss it because there's only one script supervisor. So it's interesting to hear that statement. Another thing I find with myself is I have to keep track of the fashions that are coming out of Paris or coming out of Milan or Tokyo, because that's where the future is going to come, and not here. They seem to be, no, I hate to say it, Toronto is like a year behind or 2 years behind, so that's very important too. And thank you very much. And I like to get into also, ask a question about sewing. I'm not a sewer, but I have taken art and design and everything else. So I just wonder how the sewing fits in to the whole thing.
Well, as costume designers, we hire a department. We're a manager as well as an artist. So we have to create a budget based on the needs of the production, and part of that is figuring out how we're going to get the costumes bought or made. And so we would, if you're doing a show where it has a lot of making, you have to have a whole department of makers. So you've got your cutter and your first hand and your stitchers. And so that is kind of like sort of an important creative team that can understand your vision and make it into, I'm lucky because I can cut and sew, but there are some designers who cannot. And so they're trying to sort of say, well, this is how I see it. And I'm a horrible illustrator. I was a really great artist when I was 12, but I still draw like a very talented 12-year-old. And so, you know, I think everyone has their own way of communicating their designs. And so I'm lucky because I can actually, you know, jot out what the pattern pieces should look like, and I can discuss with the sewers that. But I think each designer has their own way of communicating. And with a contemporary show where you're not necessarily making stuff, but still you're altering, because what you buy in the stores may not necessarily look great on camera, because camera, you know, that whole thing, it's true, it does add 10 pounds. So you are taking in sleeves to give a little bit of room between the waist and the arm and stuff like that. So there's lots of tricks of the trade that we're always doing. Sewing is very important.
So I know some, so that's
Okay. Yes.
Hi, two things. Just wanted to know, do you look into forecasting swatches, colors 2 years down the line, if you subscribe to forecasting? And the other thing is, how far do you push back when it comes to egos and people who are really, I tend to do that, but then I give in, and some tricks that you use would be helpful.
Okay, well, I've been lucky to deal with mostly really fantastic cast, but there are times when you get the ego coming in. It's like, I don't care that I'm playing a bike courier. I do want to dress like a male gigolo, and or a male version of Britney Spears, whatever you want to talk about. So you know, you're when you encounter a problem personality that they're not getting on board with what production is discussed and whatnot before they're cast, that becomes a team effort. That's when you actually have to go and say to the director and the producers, listen, we've talked about this, and the actor feels very strongly in pretty much the opposite direction. Or you know, I was on a show where, you know, the character was written as a loan shark, and he wanted to wear a white suit, and it's like it did not work for the film. It was a cool concept, but not for that film. And so trying to move him, you know, in the direction the director wanted, and moving the director towards what, so we ended up, you know, was kind of like meeting in the middle. So you have to give input to the actors need to own their character. So you have to try and some way bring what they are envisioning into it. But on the other hand, you also have to pull them out of their ego and into their character. And it's a real, you're part therapist when you're doing a fitting. You know, you really are trying to, I mean, I was doing a movie with Paris Hilton, and her character was really gothy, and she herself is not. And so I was showing her these clothes, and she was kind of shuddering. But she was a really good sport, and she put everything on. And she said, well, it's great I would never wear this, but it's great for my character. And when you have an actor who's willing to try stuff and say, I am not this character, you've won. But sometimes people just can't separate, and so you really are trying to just massage it in a direction. And I've seen films fail because the actor couldn't embrace their role and they just wanted to play themselves. And so it's frustrating when that happens, and it really does come down to then the producers and the director who have to sort of step in there, because if you, we were just talking about this, if you push too far with an actor, you lose their trust, and then they don't want to deal with you at all, and you become the enemy, and then you've lost the whole film.
It is really fun though, when you're having a fitting and you do. It takes a while. The fitting process sometimes can take a couple of hours, but when you find the character through the clothing and you can feel it, and the actor knows it, and it's just a good feeling. You know, they've found that jacket or whatever it is that makes them the character, where they can actually escape who they are for a minute, and it's kind of a really fun. It's exciting. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, okay. Her, and then up front.
I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit about your collaboration with the director of photography. If you've ever had any major conflicts in terms of color or texture or vision, how it was resolved, and if there's any key traits that you really appreciate in a director of photography for those kinds of instances.
No.
I've actually had almost a horrific experience with a DP who is brilliant. He's an artist. His work is beautiful, but I was stuck in the middle between an actor who loves people in white and a DP who refuses to shoot the color white. So it's kind of like we always have to work very closely with the DOP, trying to figure out what, depending on what film stock, if it's HD, if it's red cam, is it film, is it Fuji, is it Kodak, who knows what it is. So then each of those media will affect the color and how costumes and everything on screen will actually appear. So when we are, and depending too, is it set in the night? Is it set in the day? What is the, is there, is it going to be dark? Is it going to be light? So white is one of the hardest colors on camera, because some people can light it and some people cannot. And some film, some media like it and some just cannot handle it, and it just blows out. Now, sometimes you want that on purpose. You like that blown out look, and I've done that, especially for flashbacks and stuff like that, where it's a technique that you purposely put stuff that's going to go hot so that it reads that way. And so this DP, I kept showing swatches. So, usually I go with some samples and we do a camera test to say, well, what's going to read white on camera? Because it's usually not bright white. You tech it down with dye or tea or to make it slightly off-white, but on camera it looks white. And so every time he's like, well, it needs to be, 30% darker. So, okay, and then we go back and dye it, and then, well, no, it needs to be 30. Well, in theater, we have to go fairly dark for white because the strength of the lights. So we were going to a theater tech. It was like beige. And we were trying not to go too warm, so we were adding a bit of gray in there. This I call grayish. Or man wash, no offense to the guys out there, but when men do laundry, that color that happens to the whites. And so he kept going darker, and then eventually said, well, now, that's just going to look dirty, which was true. But he didn't want, he was just trying to get around using white. He wanted us to go blue or go to a color, but the director really wanted, it was so difficult. but in the end, we just started to go more gray. And, I really talked to her and said, this is really what the director wants. And, I would go to the director and say, he really doesn't want to shoot the white. He's got a real, it was very, very complicated. I can say that in the end, the movie looked fantastic, but it was very painful. And, but definitely I've had DPs who've saved my butt as well. So, depends on the film and, especially working in new media, my first show on RedCam and, just seeing how, the blues were changing and certain colors go very different depending, and also just depending on the light.
For example, we had some practice jerseys that we ordered for our hero team, and they came in and they were what I thought was going to be orange, and they showed up fluorescent orange, and I had maybe 2 days to get them printed and on the actors, and I called up our DOP, and I was so worried because I knew I wouldn't be able to get the practice jerseys in the color I wanted, and it was a lot of time restrictions, and he basically, shooting with the new cameras, he was like, oh, don't worry, we'll just dial it down. It's going to be fine, so I hope it will be. I don't know, I haven't seen it yet.
Now we all have to go see it and see if it worked. Yeah. Okay, one last one.
Thank you so much. This has really been wonderful. All of you have a fantastic array of films that you've each worked on. I was curious if you have a particular period or a particular country or aesthetic that you're dying to do next, or if you have those projects that somewhere in the back of their mind.
Go back to the 70s. I think that would be fun.
Which one?
The 70s.
70s? That's
Western.
period, right?
Yeah, I would kill to do a Western. Not you, I wouldn't kill you, don't worry.
I'd love to shoot in Asia. I'd just love to, all the color over there. And
Which one did you say?
I'd just love to shoot in Asia somewhere. Like
I hope you enjoyed this. I just found it so enlightening, so very interesting. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you.